The rain was a cold, relentless curtain that blurred the world into shades of gray as I stood on the sidewalk, clutching a single plastic bin containing everything I owned. I was 13 years old, and the taillights of my parents' car were disappearing into the mist, leaving me behind like a piece of unwanted furniture. My mother's last words to me weren't, "I love you," or "I'm sorry," but a sharp, panicked, "We just can't carry your weight anymore, Maya. Your uncle will handle it." I felt a hand, large, warm, and steady, rest on my shoulder. I looked up to see Uncle Arthur. He didn't look like the billionaire the newspapers described. He looked like a man who had just seen a tragedy and decided, right then and there, that it would not be the end of the story. "They didn't give you away, Maya," he whispered, his voice thick with a resolve that frightened and comforted me all at once. "They just gave me the greatest gift I never asked for. Come inside. Your life starts now." I didn't know then that his kindness wasn't just a gesture, but a shield against a world that was already trying to tear him down. I didn't know that 15 years later, the roles would be completely reversed. Have you ever been discarded by the people who were supposed to be your foundation, only to find a cornerstone in the most unexpected place? Most people think being taken in by a wealthy relative is a fairy tale, but they don't see the shadows that come with the gold. They don't see the secret I've been keeping for over a decade, a secret that today is either going to save my uncle's legacy or burn the rest of my family to the ground. Stick with me, because this isn't just a story about being saved. It's about what happens when the girl who was too much weight to carry becomes the only one strong enough to hold up the world. My name is Maya, and for the first 13 years of my life, I was the inconvenience. My parents, David and Linda, were people who lived for the thrill of the next big thing, the next high-stakes investment, the next social circle. I was a quiet child, a girl who preferred books to parties, and in their eyes, that made me a liability. When their latest sure-thing business venture collapsed into a heap of debt and legal threats, they decided to flee the country to avoid the fallout. They could only afford 2 tickets to Europe. They chose themselves. Uncle Arthur was my father's older brother, but they couldn't have been more different. While my father was flashy and reckless, Arthur was a titan of industry, a man who built a real estate empire from the ground up through grit and an almost supernatural sense of ethics. He was a widower, living alone in a sprawling estate that smelled of old library books and expensive cedar. He was the kind of man who spoke slowly because he wanted every word to mean something. When I moved in, I was a shell of a girl. I flinched when voices were raised. I hid food in my room because I was terrified that one day the cupboards would be bare again. Arthur saw it all. He didn't push me to talk, and he didn't shower me with toys to buy my affection. Instead, he gave me something far more valuable. He gave me a seat at his table, literally. Every night, no matter how big the merger he was working on, we sat down for dinner at 7 p.m. He would talk to me about architecture, about the history of the city, and eventually about the game of business. He treated my teenage opinions as if they were executive insights. "Money is just paper, Maya," he told me when I was 16, as we looked out over the city skyline from his balcony. "But your name, your word, that's the only currency that never devalues. Don't ever let someone trade your integrity for a quick win." I grew up in the shadow of his greatness, but he never let me feel small. I went to the best schools, sure, but I also worked every summer in the mailrooms of his various companies. He wanted me to see the heart of the machine, not just the polish. By the time I was 25, I had become his right hand, his lead strategist. I was the ice queen to the outside world, but to him, I was the daughter he never had. However, the higher we climbed, the more the vultures circled. My parents, after 15 years of silence and failed schemes abroad, had caught wind of Arthur's failing health. They didn't come back for me, they came back for the empire they thought was their birthright, unaware that the little girl they left in the rain had spent 15 years learning how to build walls they could never climb. The incident that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning that felt entirely too ordinary. Arthur had been struggling with a heart condition that he kept strictly private, known only to me and his personal physician. We were in his study reviewing the plans for the New Dawn project, a massive low-income housing development that was his passion project, his way of giving back to the city that made him. It was $1 billion risk, and his board of directors was terrified of it. "Maya," he said, his voice unusually thin, "the board is going to try to oust me. They think I've grown soft. They want to sell the land to a commercial developer who will turn it into luxury condos. They don't understand that the people need homes, not glass towers." Before I could respond, he gasped, clutching his chest. The color drained from his face as he collapsed into his leather chair. I remember the sensory overload of that moment, the sound of the crystal water carafe shattering on the floor, the smell of the spilled water on the Persian rug, and the terrifying, raspy sound of his struggle for breath. As I called for the paramedics, my phone buzzed. It was a restricted number. I answered it, my voice trembling as I shouted for help into the room. A voice on the other end, cold and familiar, stopped my heart. "I heard the old man is finally giving out, Maya. It's been a long time. Is he dead yet?" It was my father. He wasn't calling to check on his brother, he was calling to check on the vacancy. Within 48 hours, while Arthur lay in a coma in the ICU, my parents arrived at the estate like they had never left. They walked through the front doors with a team of lawyers, claiming that because Arthur had no biological children and was currently incapacitated, they, as his next of kin, were the legal executors of his estate and his voting shares on the board. They looked at me with a mixture of pity and condescension. My mother, draped in a coat that probably cost more than my first year of college, actually tried to hug me. "Oh, Maya, look at you, all grown up and playing secretary. Don't worry, honey, the real family is here now. You can go back to your little life. We'll take it from here." The internal conflict was a roar in my ears. I knew Arthur's deepest secrets. I knew he had a secret trust, a legal kill switch he had designed in case the vultures ever came for him. But to activate it, I had to reveal something that would change how the world and the board saw him. I had to choose between protecting his privacy or saving his life's work. My secret was this. Arthur had legally adopted me 10 years ago, but we had kept it quiet to protect me from the press and the kidnapping threats that come with being a billionaire's heir. If I came forward, I was the legal next of kin. But if I did, my parents would stop at nothing to destroy my reputation to prove I had manipulated an old man. The tension in the house was suffocating. My parents moved into the guest wing and immediately started ordering the staff around. My father began meeting with the very board members Arthur distrusted, promising them that once Arthur was quietly retired, the New Dawn project would be scrapped for a massive payout. I watched from the sidelines, playing the part of the grieving, submissive niece. I needed them to think I was powerless while I gathered the documents I needed from Arthur's private vault, a vault only I had the biometric access to. "You're making a mistake, David," I said to my father one evening in the kitchen. He was pouring a glass of Arthur's most expensive scotch. "Arthur built this for the community. You're destroying his legacy before he's even gone." He laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "Legacy? Legacy doesn't pay for the lifestyle your mother and I deserve, Maya. We spent 15 years scraping by in Europe because of Arthur's ethics. He could have helped us, but he chose to be fair. Well, now it's our turn to be fair. And as for you, you should be grateful we're letting you stay until the funeral. Once the papers are signed, you're out, just like before. You were always a burden, Maya. Arthur was just too polite to tell you." The heartbreak was a physical weight, but it was overshadowed by a cold, burning anger. I realized then that they hadn't changed at all. They still saw people as assets or liabilities. I spent that night in the hospital, sitting by Arthur's bed, listening to the beep of the heart monitor. I whispered to him, "You told me my name was my currency. Well, I'm about to spend it all." The next morning was the emergency board meeting. My parents arrived in a limousine, dressed in black but smiling like they'd won the lottery. The board members were gathered in the mahogany-paneled room, many of them looking at their watches, ready to vote Arthur out and sell the New Dawn land. My father stood at the head of the table. "As the legal representative of the Sterling family," he began, "I move to dissolve the current New Dawn initiative and—" "I object," I said, stepping into the room. I wasn't wearing the simple sweaters I usually wore. I was in a sharp charcoal suit Arthur had bought me for my graduation, my hair pulled back, my eyes like flint. "Maya, dear, go sit in the lobby," my mother sighed. "This is for the grown-ups." "Actually, Mother," I said, the word feeling like ash in my mouth, "it's for the owners, and as of 2016, you aren't the next of kin. I am." I laid the adoption papers on the table, followed by a power of attorney document Arthur had signed only a month ago, anticipating exactly this move. The silence that followed was thick you could have cut with a knife. The revelation hit the room like a physical shock. My father grabbed the papers, his hands shaking as he scanned the legal seals. "This is a fake! She's manipulated him! He was senile!" he shouted, his face turning a mottled purple. "The notary is in the hall, David," I said calmly, "and so is Arthur's physician, who can testify that he was in perfect mental health when these were signed. I didn't manipulate anyone. I stayed. I worked. I earned his trust while you were running from your own debts." But then the outsider arrived, the one person who could tip the scales. Arthur's oldest rival, Elias Thorne, a man who had fought Arthur for every square inch of the city for 40 years, stood up from the back of the room. Everyone expected him to side with my parents, to finally see Arthur's empire fall. He walked toward me, his cane clicking on the floor. He looked at the adoption papers, then looked at me. "I remember the day Arthur took you in," Elias said, his voice gravelly. "He came to me and canceled a merger that would have made us both billions." I asked him why. He said, "Because I have a girl at home who needs to know that people are more important than profit." I thought he was a fool then. Elias turned to the board. "But looking at this young woman and looking at the vultures trying to pick at Arthur's bones, I see he was the only one of us who made a real investment. Maya has more of Arthur's spirit in her pinky finger than David has in his entire body. I'm backing the girl. New Dawn stays." The board shifted. With Thorne's support and my legal standing, my parents' coup evaporated in minutes. They were escorted out of the building by security. As they were being led away, my mother turned to me, her face twisted in a mask of fake sorrow. "How could you do this to us, Maya, after everything we gave you?" "You gave me a plastic bin and a rainy sidewalk," I said, my voice steady. "Arthur gave me a life. Goodbye, Linda." The personal growth I felt in that moment was staggering. I wasn't the 13-year-old girl waiting for a car to come back. I was the woman who had already arrived. But the real turning point came later that afternoon, when I got the call from the hospital. Arthur was awake. The walk down the hospital corridor was the longest of my life. When I entered the room, Arthur was propped up on pillows, looking fragile but with that familiar spark in his eyes. He saw me and smiled, a weak but genuine expression of love. "I heard you had a busy morning," he croaked. "I used the kill switch, Arthur," I whispered, sitting by his bed. "I'm sorry, I know we wanted to keep it private." "Maya," he said, taking my hand, "the secret wasn't meant to protect me. It was meant to give you a choice. You chose to stand up when it mattered most. You didn't just save the company, you saved the homes of 5,000 families. I couldn't be prouder if you were my own flesh and blood, which legally and spiritually you are." The months that followed were a period of intense healing. Arthur recovered enough to return home, though he officially retired, handing the title of CEO to me. We finished the New Dawn project together. On the day the first families moved in, we stood on the balcony of the community center. I saw children playing in the park below, children who wouldn't have to worry about where they were going to sleep that night. As for my parents, they tried to sue for a portion of the estate, but the case was laughed out of court. They eventually disappeared again, likely to find some other scheme in some other corner of the world. I didn't hate them anymore. Hate takes energy, and I needed all of mine to build the future Arthur had dreamed of. I restored the estate, but I changed one thing. I turned the sprawling, empty guest wing into a scholarship housing unit for students who, like me, had been displaced or abandoned. I wanted the house to be full of voices, full of hope, full of the sound of people being given a second chance. I connected back to that rainy day 15 years ago. I realized that being abandoned wasn't the tragedy of my life, it was the clearing of the path. If they hadn't left me, I would have become just like them, hollow and hungry for things that don't matter. Because I was left behind, I found a man who taught me that the greatest wealth isn't what you have, but what you can do for others. It's a rainy evening, much like the one 15 years ago. Maya is standing in the foyer of the estate, looking out at the driveway. She isn't holding a bin, she's holding a cup of tea. Arthur is in the background, reading by the fireplace. It's funny how life comes full circle. Tonight, the rain is falling just as hard as it did when I was 13. But I'm not standing on the sidewalk anymore. I'm inside, in the warmth, in a home built on a foundation of integrity and love. I look at my reflection in the window, and I don't see the inconvenience anymore. I see a woman who held her ground when the world tried to shift it. Most people think that being abandoned is the end of your value. They think that if the people who brought you into this world don't want you, then no one will. But I'm living proof that you are not defined by who leaves you. You are defined by who you become in their absence. My parents abandoned me at 13, unaware that 15 years later, I would be the one to protect the only real family I ever had. If you're out there tonight feeling like you're too much weight to carry, or feeling like you've been left behind in the rain, just keep walking. Find your Arthur. Or better yet, become the Arthur for someone else. Your life doesn't end when the car drives away. It starts when you realize you don't need to chase it. My name is Maya Sterling, and I'm finally right where I belong.